Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Luann said, my name is Deshanna. I am one of the Alliance Care's mentors. And so tonight I'm very excited to be leading you in this training and having this training with you around the essential connections for African American children and care, and just ways to be able to, provide additional support for children. We know that disproportionality is happening throughout the system, and that African American, Native American, and multiracial children in Washington are more likely to enter the foster care system, and also stay in foster care longer and less likely to be adopted. We also know that often, like, children entering into foster care are placed in homes with caregivers of different races or ethnicities and cultures than their own, and that they can experience discrimination and racism in many different forms, from exclusion, from bullying, from subtle looks or comments that they may hear, from innuendos and assumptions that are made. And that as caregivers, and for us, it's really important to recognize that people don't all experience the same impact of the stereotypes or prejudice equally. Youth who have identities related to their gender expression, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, or spiritual practices, or other parts of their family of individual cultures, that all these pieces can add up, and they are what makes a complete individual. And so, one piece can be looked at, and for a child to also feel empowered to be able to further explore that in their home is also a part of the conversation and training that we'll be having this evening. Caregivers and advocates such as all of you, we can help see that. We can help redirect, hold those conversations for the youth. As a caregiver, whatever race or ethnicity or cultural background you are, you will have a responsibility to also, step in and provide support and advocacy for that child in your home. And, helping to maintain essential connections while a child is in your care is really important. And I'm going to go to. So, in this evening's conversation and training, we are going to be looking at these 10 essential connections. We're going to be looking at information, a significant person, a group, my meaningful role, your meaningful role as a caregiver, means of support, sources of joy, system of values, places, culture, and history. Since we've done introductions, continue. So transracial caregiving consists of children of one race or culture being raised by parents of a different race or culture. Without connection to their own roots, a Black child being raised in a white world it can feel very separating. It can feel like there's a lot of separation in the home at times, that white people who are surrounding him or her who look different from them, can lead to questions happening, a feeling of loneliness. But, he has a connection. And so in looking, at a child's like background, and, if you are able to have connection like with a child's like family members, that is one way to, step in and then uplift that child and provide reassurance and affirmation around, the child feeling comfortable. And this is vital to a child's like healthy development. No matter how one is raised in society, will assign him to a race or a culture, and you may have heard in conversations that, culture in one family's, unlike one family member's home, can be different from that of another family member. So, it's like the child could be living with, say, a relative, like maybe they're living with their grandparents, and that home culture can still be different from that of their parents, or that of another older sibling that maybe they would like be living with. And so also looking at that piece of culture and how that aligns. um, as I had kind of mentioned, for a child being raised in a home of a different race or culture or ethnicity background than their own, that it can feel isolating. It can feel as though things don't fit. It can leave a child feeling lost. um, and so by connecting with your child about their race and their identity and their culture, we can learn to help them grow in their roots while incorporating what they're learning to also helping them further explore their identity, and also helping within our own home the transracial makeup and what that looks like. And so you're now a home of a transracial parenting home, and so you're a home that is, of course, taking on the identity that you have and the culture that maybe you've been used to, but also shifting that and having that potentially grow and expand while caring for the children that are in your home. I'm sure that many of you have explored your own beliefs about other cultures or other races in preparation of becoming a family that is equipped to be taking placements of children of all different races and backgrounds, and taking in that self-awareness. Potentially, some of you, maybe like may recall being asked the questions like during the home study process of, what are the schools like in your area? What is the neighborhood like in your area? Just those key items of taking that self-awareness of knowing that potentially the school you're in is not overly diverse, or maybe it is. And so picking up on that, or just even the community that you're within, and, the neighbors that are in your area, and being aware of that. And being aware of also potentially one's own bias that they may have, or that family members may have. And so that kind of leads in perfectly with this next section of things to think about, of how many friends do you have of another race or culture? What types of things do you seek to know about other cultures? Have you found yourself attending other multicultural events or celebrations that are going on? What are things that, what things do you know about specialized, skin and hair care for children of color? Um, how have you been able to incorporate other races and cultures into your home life? And if not currently doing that, what are ways that you've thought about that, of how you would incorporate that potentially going forward? Like I had mentioned, are the schools in your area diverse with children of many different cultural backgrounds? What cultures are represented in the church that you attend? And then I know I touched on the piece of just to get like also extended family members. And what do you know of your extended family members' views, and um, or like points of knowledge around different races and backgrounds? Have and how have you prepared your family to be able to experience racism? What are the conversations that you're having in your home? Because now, as I mentioned, like now you would be a transracial family. And in your home, does your home give all children an opportunity to see people similar to them in a positive and affirming way? And in welcoming like a child into your home, you know, like what are things that you feel you'll need to do in taking, that first step back and thinking about your culture? what cultures and celebrations are you currently doing in your home? And thinking about, children of different cultures and backgrounds, what celebrations have you either been a part of, and from there, how do you think you would incorporate that into your home? Um, and this also means, taking time to consider the different stereotypes that you might be carrying, or the different comments that you'll hear, and whether for you, I guess, and also just how you can collectively come together and provide a safe space for that conversation, and also having that conversation that meets a child, also at the age level that they are at, um because and things, of course, as we will know sometimes, is that, like, when a child's in school, like, there can be comments and things that are said that are maybe said for a child that's in, like, elementary school, and so then sometimes that can be surprising or alarming, the comments that your child comes home and says to you. And so how do you also, like, equip yourself for being able to provide context and a healthy environment of that conversation, and reaffirming, and also explaining the different ways maybe to respond. Some families do, like, role play in conversations as a way to, like, open up that conversation. So let's start by looking at your home. What are some things that you and your family do in your home that you think that others may find different? Oh, sorry. And I don't know if anyone wants to, write in the chat of a response towards that, or if there's anything that someone wanted to say as a comment. Yeah, when a child's coming into our home, they have to adjust to, not only potentially being a new home, but also in a different community from that maybe they are used to. Um, and at times, the community may feel very different from where they were previously staying. Um, and sometimes, we may hear people say that all that stuff doesn't really matter, and that all a kid needs is love and food and in their stomach, and then a roof over their head. But as we know, and as we go through this process, like, we know that there is, like, so much more that goes into providing a home of, like, comfort. um and so I think also, just kind of like in looking at it and thinking about it, imagine that, like, you're walking down a sidewalk as a white person in a predominantly Black community, and how do you think you would feel? What are things that come to mind as how that would feel? Or do, like, would you feel like you can fit in, um or would you find yourself being hyper aware of the area that you're in, and what's going on, and the fact that you are the only white person in that area? Are you feeling, like, alone? What are kind of thoughts that go through your mind when you're thinking of, potentially going through that experience of going to a predominantly Black area? Um, would you know how to fit in if you live there? Would you feel that maybe you would change how you speak a little bit, or would you be dressing a little bit differently? Um, would you think that potentially, like, you're in danger of being attacked for not looking like others that are around you? Um, would you be treated the same way in the neighborhood stores, or would you be, like, more cautious that you're being watched because of looking different in that area? um and where would you feel like you did fit in? What would you want to know if you were transplanted into a different neighborhood to be living for a long time, or to be living in that different area permanently? and and how would you go about finding out those things that you want to know? You know, and we're going to speak about this a little bit further in some of these additional slides, but those are just kind of some things to think about, when thinking about the difference of like how it can feel for a child that's, maybe come from a neighborhood that for the child they were able to see people that look like them daily, all the time, to then potentially having a placement change and be moved into a home in a neighborhood where they don't see anyone that looks like them. Um, and so just kind of, yeah, how that shift may feel and how that change may feel with potentially all the different eyes that are on you. For essential connections, and looking at how do we maintain and build these healthy cultural connections for every youth in care, and more specifically for our children of color. A child's connection with others is super critical. And, those connections are what provide the foundations for healthy development. These connections are with family, whether it be parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other relatives. And these connections are also with people in their community, extended kin, teachers, coaches that the youth may be around, counselors, their peers, their neighbors. If they're connected with church, then the church groups that they're connected with. As I mentioned, like coaches, so then sports and that connection. And these connections are strong and stable connections that can be really necessary for a child to thrive and develop and build a sense of, self and belonging, and the ability to form what we would look at is secure attachments. They are especially important for children who have experienced trauma, you know, including maltreatment, whether it be like removal from the home. That is also definitely a trauma. Um, and these can, impact and impair normal development. It can impair normal development of a child's brain, of a child's nervous system, of a child's immune system, and, lead to, body stresses and response systems. And also at times, children who are placed in foster care are at risk of also experiencing unintended additional trauma and negative consequences across their lifespan, even when they're, in out of home placements, and even when that out of home placement is necessary. Sometimes that can compound more trauma for that child. And so, to protect them and to help, lessen some of that when a child is removed from their home, and the continued separation from a child's, primary caregivers, it can get, complicated. And so the ability to maintain and nurture relationships, and, the prospects of reunification, and nurturing that and keeping that positive conversation in place, and just, that connections are so key, and they're a key protective factor for children throughout their environment while they are going through the child welfare system. And, to help understand some of these nuances of parenting transracially, it's also necessary to visit the past and understand the historical foundation of race and white privilege. We're not going to go into all of that super in depth tonight, but I really would encourage, when you have time and when you have those moments, to add it to your list of doing that additional research, and, and looking at the historical history of the child welfare system, and educate yourself about racism as it was in the past, and also how it is still today in many systems. every child, is entitled to have their culture embraced and valued as part of any family. And children living in transracial homes need parents who can recognize their need to know their cultural roots. And this is going to lead us into our next step of essential connections. And this is going to lead us into the information that we need. When thinking around information, what information do you think children need to know in order to live in this day and age? What are things that come to mind that you think would be key and essential for a child of a different race or culture coming into your home to know?
I don't know that it would have anything to do necessarily so much with race or culture, but coming into my home, I think that they would find comfort in knowing what our family routine is, where to get their needs met while they're living in our home, um, and to address that basic foundation their first night that they walk through my door versus I think that's the most important thing. If you need to go to the bathroom tonight, where's the bathroom? Do you have my permission to get up and go? If you're thirsty, is it okay for you to
Mhm.
get up and get a drink of water? That kind of thing. And then move on from there.
Yeah. Any other things that come to mind for people of the things you feel would be key and important information for a child to know? Yeah, no, definitely. That's really key. Just starting the conversation, and just and getting it going. Because sometimes there may be this thought of just like, oh well, we'll address it when they bring it up, but also providing it is just, I mean, and not like I say, provide it in like casual conversation, and not to say that to diminish any importance of the value of the topic that you're speaking about. Whether you're talking about race and historical racism, um, or definitely like tense conversations, but talking about it in a sense of just providing that okayness for it to be brought up, at any time. Because sometimes what can happen is that the the thought is, oh, we'll just wait till the child asks a question or till they come home and say something, where potentially that could maybe seem like a little nerve wracking for a child to come home and be like, can I have this conversation like with my white parents, or with the parents that look different from me? Um, that sometimes they may not feel like they can. And so if, as parents and adults, we start that conversation and talk about it and just kind of hear what's going on, then that can continue to open the door for further exploration around it, and conversations to happen. So so in going on, some things that we can do to share information is by answering questions, um, giving them age appropriate information, as we touched on, clarifying with the social worker how much information the child already knows, asking the child to explain his or her understanding of why they're in care, asking children about their personal likes around clothing, around food. If the child has done chores, some children coming into our home may be used to doing some chores, and some children may not be used to doing any. And so then having that conversation and setting what seems like an age appropriate and realistic expectation that you can maybe set around chores. And then also how we had touched on briefly around food. Um For some children, the food that they may be used to in their home is not something that you're used to, or potentially like in your home, maybe you have like a vegetarian home and that's not, the child's used to maybe eating some burgers. And so how would you like shift that, or, make modifications, or potentially, sometimes for children, something that is often like said is that sometimes for kids, like there can be a feeling of, insecurity around food, in the sense of that you'll find that maybe a child will be like keeping snacks like in their room. And so, having that place of having that conversation around potentially like if you do have like a snack drawer, or if you have like a fruit bin, and saying like where that is, so that the child can, always know potentially like where there's a snack that they can get. Um, and then, as we had mentioned also earlier, like explaining the rules and processes in your home and in your family life, and having those open conversations and those clear conversations in the beginning, and also seeing potentially like how that aligns like with a child that's with you, and potentially, maybe there's some similarities of things that you do in your home that they also have done in their, previous placements, or that they did like when they were with like their parents. Just so that there can also just be that, clarity and explanation given early on to help answer potentially any questions that, well, and I realize it won't answer all the questions, but some of those initial questions that can be on a child's mind. And also, when thinking about information to share, like thinking about like what are questions that you have, or what are things that you've looked for, like when you're going into a new place, even potentially like with traveling, like when you go to a hotel room, or when you're at a hotel, things that you check. It might be like, where's the lights? Where are those switches? Where's the outlets for things? If, a child's a teenager, maybe that child has a cell phone. And so, they want to know where they can plug in their cell phone, or, just the rules and expectations around phone use. Um,
There was a
so
comment
something,
in chat too that says, I think it's important for children to know and love what their racial and cultural heritage is. Their foster son has been in care his whole life, and she thinks that the family culture is what feels like his at this point in his life because he's still very young. But she wants to make sure that he can embrace every part of who he is.
yeah, no, that's definitely, very important. And so, and I know there was the question of clarifying with that one, like asking, social worker, like how much information. And I think also, that question can also go to potentially if, as a caregiver, you have connection to the child's parents, or potentially other extended family members, and asking them, what the child knows, or what they're aware of conversations that have potentially been had with the child, depending on their age. Who are who, like, was an important person in your life when you were a child? What stands out? And who is important in your life now? And who do you think might be important in the life of your child that's in your care? Who are important people that you think might stand out for the child? And, feel free to answer, like, any one of those that you feel you wanna answer. Yeah, or connections, potentially like for teens, or I mean, not necessarily just teens, but for children who have been in care, for a bit in general, who have maybe been in a couple homes, also potentially hearing about, the connection that that child makes with like the other children in the home, um, and those connections that can be ongoing, or potentially like whether it's another child in the home that's also in care, or also potentially the family's own child, that's not in care, but those connections that can happen, over just potentially that shared experience of being a child, and things that potentially you would connect with another kid over. Those connections can also be, very important and significant for a child going through this process. And what have people, I guess, done as far as, for maintaining those significant connections? Have you found that you're setting up like in-person like visits with that, or is it something that's more being maintained over like the phone or Zoom?
There is an answer. Dawn says that she participates in person with sibling visits for birthdays. And someone else says lots of phone calls with family members out of state. And then another comment, my brother-in-law was an important person in my life. He was a youth minister and he introduced me to Christianity via the children's church. And now my husband and myself are ministers because of his influence.
Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, in the chat, I feel like, we definitely touched on these items that are here on this next slide of, yeah, visits with family or other important people, writing cards, doing phone calls, um, and then providing encouragement for the child's attachment to you and also to their family. Um, Asking, the child who, who they feel like they would like to call if they were in trouble. Asking the child who that they would like to spend more time with, and sometimes, maybe for a child like that's grandparents, and so, seeing if that's something that can be arranged if possible. Um, and asking, a child who they want to, please most, and having the child make a list of people that like they would like to invite to parties, as I noted, I saw in the chat of like having, visits with siblings and visits for birthday parties. And, if a party is happening, like, yeah, asking the child who they'd want to be on that list.
Sometimes I
Yes.
think asking those questions can open the conversation easier than just asking a child, so I mean, most kids don't know who's your significant person. They're not going to understand that word. So asking them, if you could invite anybody you wanted to a party, who would you invite? That would get them to say, the first thing out of their mouth is going to be the most important person to them at that moment. So it's a
Yeah.
good icebreaker, good conversation starters.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And preserving those connections with extended family, with community members, with their culture, their school, and and friends that they've made, and and maybe those that they've been in contact with of like that have shared values to them or customs, because all of that helps shape a child's view of the world and their thinking and their behavior. A shared cultural, heritage bond with the community that you're in, or community that they were in, and the families, that's helping to create like a sense of identity and a sense of belonging and normalcy for a child, and showing, as a caregiver, your ability to step in and provide like, support with that community and supporting those connections for the child, that can help sustain, really vital connections that a child can look back on from, years to come. And all these efforts that, that we put in as caregivers and providing that support and the healthy relationships and development, can really help a child's well-being. Children removed from their communities, they're at risk of losing those important connections, and that being really hard on them because You know, when a child is under 18, it's like they go where, potentially an adult says that they have to go. And so, what we can do to help maintain those connections, as mentioned in the chat, sometimes family is not local. Sometimes they're out of state. So there can be, some barriers that happen. But, things that we can do to help continue those connections and uplift them, um, can really, really lead to providing the stability and ongoing, um, identity for the child as they're growing and developing and coming into their own. And this leads us into our next essential connection of groups. And, and kind of thinking, what are groups that you recall that, either you've belonged to previously or that you belong to now? What groups do your children belong to? Um, would the groups that your children are involved in be supportive of the social connections for African American children in your care? And what groups would be supportive of oh, sorry, I think I may have read that question wrong. No, yeah, that's right. Sorry, in your care, yeah. And then what groups would be supportive of an African American's child's needs for connection? You know, um, when possible, like, making like an effort for children to be able to remain in their same communities is often like a conversation that's had, but as we also know, it's not always able to happen. But when you can make efforts to keep a child like connected, or ensuring that they can have consistent access to potentially like extended family or previous connections that they've had, that can really, help support a child and give them a sense of um, belonging and normalcy, as shared earlier. And so, yeah, so I don't know if there's anything that stands out for people as far as like when thinking about the groups that you belong to or groups that your children belong to. And I see in the chat about, yeah, believing strongly of keeping the child involved with their biological family as much as possible. And then, yeah, attending cultural celebrations of that of your children that are with you. And I see, if the child is old enough to request a phone call or visit, and that we let the child indicate um, how to alleviate their separation, using it as a way to alleviate their separation anxiety. And then that we like to do activities that you can also do with the child's family, such as going to parks or recreation or church. Yeah, those are all, yeah, great activities. And I guess like when thinking, yeah, are there, groups or activities or things that you're engaged in that you think when kind of like thinking now, would be supportive of the social connections for a child that's African American that's in your care?
One of the groups that I found when I was fostering that was really a connection for my African American kids was taking them to get their hair done. You don't oftentimes think about taking them to, a hair care place to be real supportive of their family or, being part of their group. But it's not like when I go and get my hair cut and it takes 10 minutes and I'm in and out, getting the ends of my hair trimmed and having a basic hi, how you doing conversation with the hairdresser. There is a whole community and culture around taking a child in to have their hair done. And it can be an hour, 2 hours, or longer. And they're making all of those connections and hearing about families and history and all that stuff. So it's a very different experience.
So when looking, at how to maintain connections with groups, I know I touched on, making that effort of trying when you can to keep a child connected to their same communities. Um, if possible, allowing the child to be able to attend the same school. We've maybe heard like terms around like McKinney-Vento, that a social worker, maybe has mentioned to you as far as like a resource of keeping a child like connected in a school that they were previously attending. Sometimes that is an option. Um, you know, enrolling the child in culturally appropriate community activities, and along with, I would say, along with the enrolling a child, in culturally appropriate like community activities, also, potentially seeing like what they've already been engaged in, and what's of interest. Because, I feel like, that can lead to sometimes stereotypes if as we may have heard of just that, like, oh, it's a black young boy, and so of course potentially he's going to be interested in basketball, maybe because of his height, and so also being mindful of that when looking at some of these community activities that you are engaging in. um Asking a child what they like to do with other people, um asking the youth what makes a good team, club, or family, um, asking what they like and don't like about playing with several other children. Some kids like hanging out in group settings, some don't. Some would rather maybe have it be like a more, one on one, or definitely a smaller group. Um, Asking the child if they have ever belonged to any groups or teams. And then talking with the teachers at your children's school about the child's ability to interact with other children. Talking with school staff around like, what the diversity is like there. Talking with school staff um, around like hypotheticals of like if situations arise, for yourself being able to know like what is the school's policy around addressing things, and how will they go about that, how will they notify you, um also asking those questions, because as we touched on like earlier, some of the things that the kids will hear at school, depending on a child's age, when children are younger, they often are spending more time at school than potentially at our home, or like at our home with like waking hours, unless it's the weekend. Because for kids that are in school, depending like when they come home, it may be that they're home and still up for like 2 more hours, and then it's going to be bedtime because of the schedule that you have them on, or because potentially they're engaged in groups and activities and sports after school or after school program. And so, knowing kind of like what those policies are around how they address issues that may arise. Um, and I don't, do we want to take a break at all, Luann? Or do you feel like we're good? I don't know if anyone needs, and also, I mean, I know anyone, if you need to step away, definitely feel free. I just want to, that's much.
I think we'll just keep going if everybody's
Okay.
okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, wonderful. And with this next slide, the meaningful role, um, you know, and what like roles can play in our life. So what roles do you have that give meaning to your life? You know, what roles do children have that give meaning to their life? And do you see meaningful roles being different for a child that's African American, from from what roles you've set out for yourself or just that you've seen? Do you see there also being a difference in those roles?
I think if I were to answer any of them, it would be what role do I have that gives meaning to my life? And I think I'm a very classic middle child. I have a lot of empathy and mediating skills that I think go to my benefit as my role in being a middle child. So I see that, and I can usually pick out middle children in the community very quickly. It's sometimes interesting to see what roles children have, and if they're the oldest child, the caretaker, or if they've been made the scapegoat in the family, whatever their role is, and how that plays out.
Yes.
And Dawn says over in the chat section, being a big sister to her younger brother siblings is an important role for her foster daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, some roles that sometimes, we see for children is potentially, if the child is like that older sibling that they've kind of taken on that role as far as, providing some of the caregiving for like their younger siblings. And so, that can be a role that sometimes if like children have had to step into. Um,
Sue
you
says
know,
in chat that she is a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, and works with friends and extended family members to be supportive, compassionate, and actively participating in their daily lives.
Wonderful. Yeah, because it's not enough, just to have like a group. We need to also have, that sense of our value within the group dynamics that we're a part of, and so that's kind of where it comes into line of identifying some of those roles. Feeling that we're accomplishing things of value, and many all want, to have that sense that we're a part of something at times greater than ourselves. And having a coherent set of beliefs about life and what it's all for. This can lead us into that, the essential connection of defining these roles of, what role do we have, that gives us our meaning to our life, or that we see giving meaning for our children. um, and then seeing those also potentially, point out and allow for us to also see potentially the differences for that of a child of a different race or background from our own. Um, as far as some ways of helping a child find that meaningful role, you know watch watching the child to see if they have a role that's seems special to them, If so, trying to help maintain that, potentially maybe they like being kind of like a leader, um, like being the one in charge a little bit, offering new roles and responsibilities. If you're, maybe not seeing that they have really a role kind of like identified, but giving space for them to try things out and different responsibilities and seeing what they like. Um, putting the child in charge of something like feeding one of the animals in the home or putting them in charge of maybe like setting the table, um asking the child to describe him or herself using adjectives, asking them to describe their favorite things to do, asking what makes them feel really proud, what makes them excited, what brings joy to them and makes them feel proud. Asking your child's teachers about any special talents that maybe they've seen or interests that they've heard the child mention or seen them engage in at school, or qualities that they see in the classroom that your child demonstrates. um, Asking how your child thinks others might describe them, whether it be friends, whether it be teachers, their coach, those who they interact with. um, and asking the child, what he or she would like to do when they grow up. What are things that interest them? you know um Along with all these meaningful roles, children need to feel like they're helping, and also providing support in their family. And so with that we step into the next essential connection of means of support and what that might look like. um, how does a child support their family? Some children come into care already parentified. I know I kind of touched on that one earlier, an older sibling being kind of maybe used to helping and caring for their younger siblings, maybe stepping in, when their parents are not able to do so, or stepping in, assisting their parent because that's maybe what they've been used to doing. And we need to be respectful of that role and what its meaning is to the child. um, and not only in terms of their self-worth, but also the just kind of like identity and role that they set out for themselves as far as their place in the family, and the stature that it can bring with it for a child. And so you know and kind of looking at that, it's moving slowly when shifting care away from the parentified child, potentially stepping in on some of the responsibilities that maybe they've been previously used to taking, and and letting them know that they don't have to, but doing it gradually, not just an abrupt like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Because if a child has been used to doing something for one way for a year, 6 months, it doesn't you can't necessarily really put like an exact time frame on that for what that means to the child. um Giving the child an allowance depending on something, studying for yourself, either collectively with the child within reason, kind of an outline of what an allowance could look like, and having a conversation around that. Asking the child how much it might cost to run a household, asking those kind of questions, having those questions around financial literacy, depending on the age of the children in your home. um Asking what they you know, what it would look like to earn money. Um, Asking, you know, the child if he or she has been to a bank. Um, and, you know, and then asking the youth if they would like to have a savings account. For teenagers, you know, that can be a very exciting thing as far as, you know, going to a bank and opening up a bank account. Um, you know, as just kind of like, you know, as they're getting older and stepping into that. And so, you know, of ways of support and you know, and giving them, you know, that ownership of potentially like if they have been earning an allowance, you know, that ownership of going in and putting it in their bank account. Next, we have the essential connection of the source of joy, you know, and thinking about what makes a child happy, what makes us happy, and, you know, and how does that translate in that expression. For, you know, sources of joy, you know, watching the child to see, you know, what, as I mentioned, like, yeah, what joy and happiness and attempts to like recreate those experiences for a child. Um, Asking the social worker, you know, when possible, you know, the biological parents or the extended family or relatives or potentially really close friends that they have, about things such as places or activities that the children especially enjoy, so that you can help recreate those experiences that maybe they've had. You know, asking the child what he or she likes to do, you know, asking them what makes them happy or what are, you know, memories that they look back on or things that they've done that, you know, brought a lot of joy to them. You know, asking what their favorite holidays are. Um, you know, potentially also asking like around that same question of, you know, maybe what are holidays that they don't enjoy so much. You know, because as we can experience, like, you know, some holidays bring a lot of joy, some don't. And so, you know, potentially like knowing that, because potentially maybe situations have happened on holidays. So also, you know, knowing that when looking into the source of joy, it's seeing where a child's feelings are with holidays. Um, Asking the child how they like to be celebrated. You know, I feel like that's something that sometimes like happens in workplaces. You may find that like you know, like a manager may ask their team of like ways that you like to be celebrated. And so asking the same thing of a child in your home. You know, potentially they maybe like want parties or maybe they don't and they just like to do like a family dinner. And that, you know, feels joyous for them. You know, asking him or her, you know, like things that they do to make themselves feel better when they are sad or when they're feeling lonely or scared, or what are things that others can do to help them when they are feeling those feelings of, you know, sadness, loneliness, or feeling scared. um Playing, you know, the question of, you know, I wish this, or I would like it when such and such could happen. So, you know, maybe it's that I would like when I could have more visits with so and so, you know, maybe a grandparent or something. Um, you know, and taking turns, you know, going back and forth and saying your different wishes or things that you would like. Um, Playing the glad game by completing the sentence with I'm glad that, or I'm glad for. um, you know, asking the child about favorite songs that they have, um, favorite foods that they like to eat, foods that they don't like to eat. You know, some kids like sweets, some don't. And so, yeah, you know, just having those conversations around the joy. So the next connection for us steps into the system of values. What do you have strong beliefs about? What are things that come to mind that are strong beliefs of yours? And what types of things do your children have strong beliefs about?
I think something that was a strong belief in our family, my parents are ministers, and so it was unusual for some children when they would come into our home and we would bless the food, or we would gather when somebody came in with a lot of sharing of hugs and asking lots of questions and just getting involved in people's lives. And but you know, the knowing that the food is sitting right there in front of you and you have to wait for a long-winded preacher to say the blessing can sometimes be torturous for kids. And so that's something that um, we kind of made fun with kids that came into our home. Grandpa has to pray first, so hold on, you know, that kind of thing. Don is saying in chat, family loyalty and outward affection are important for her foster daughter's family.
As like for a child that's in your home and you're identifying types or things that your children seem to be strongly connected to or have strong beliefs about, also like introducing new values without demeaning a child's like family or a prior way of doing things, is also a way to kind of like step into that and values. Because like I feel like it was mentioned earlier in the conversation, for some, maybe eating around the table all together was like not it was not the way that the family did it. Um, and so, a child coming into a home where that is how your family, eats dinner or eats any meal or every meal, that can be a big change. And initially, a child may not see like the value in that, or um, and so, having that conversation and kind of inviting them into the new value that maybe your family, strongly holds on to. Um, and allowing that to be something that can be gradual.
I think Crystal has a good one. She says respecting elders and referring to people older than oneself with a handle of some sort, like Mr. and
Mm,
Mrs. Auntie or some other kind of title. That can be foreign
yes.
to some kids coming into care, or some kids bring that into care, and it's not something that the home that they come into practices. And then,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. And Sue was saying she believes in accepting people for who they are without passing judgment. Oh, and here's a long one. We're not a religious family, really, but do celebrate the holidays. We raise our kids the different religions, beliefs out there and let them know we support them in whatever they believe in. We'll even go to church with them. We strongly believe in raising our kids and being kind, caring, compassionate, respectful, outspoken, and to stand up for not only yourself, but others that can't. We do family nights, whether it's movie night or game night, and we're big gamers here and love doing outdoor movies in our backyard. And then Emily says our foster son's mom sent a children's Bible with him and asked that it be read to him. it was the same children's Bible we had read with our own kids when they were young. So that has been a special connection between both our families.
Well, yeah, and a few other things such as using words like, in this house we I feel like it was touched on of like appropriate language and manners. Not accusing the child of potentially stealing um as their idea or value of belongings, may be different from ours or from what we're used to. For example, anything in the child's previous home, may have belonged to like everyone. And so there wasn't such, maybe that distinction. Um, asking what is important or unimportant to the child. You know, um, Asking the child what people do that is good, and asking how people should spend their time, and taking turns, playing a game of like, if I were president, or, if I was in charge, I would, different, yeah. I mean, you can use different prefixes of, what you would say, but just kind of doing like, if I was this, I would maybe have this happen, have a later bedtime. I don't know what, the different examples that kids may come up with. But as a way of, just kind of, yeah, going through and looking at different values and looking at different things of, importance, and also kind of seeing like where that, sits on a chart that you maybe like made out of like 1 to 10, level of value for certain things. We all need, a safe place, an environment that enables us to lead our lives without experiencing undue fear, and that also allows us to develop to our fullest potential. Places we may think are important to the child, they may be vastly different than places that they would choose. And so, it's important to kind of ask them, what are places that are important to them? Um, and you could do things such as, if a child has a favorite park or a restaurant that they, like to go to, and I feel like this had been, touched on earlier with the like taking pictures, um, creating new favorite places by creating fond memories there. Asking the child to describe their favorite home, asking them to describe the rooms, potentially things that are in those rooms, items that stand out. Asking the child what would make them feel at home in your home. Maybe there was a stuffy that they had, that they didn't, that they don't have with them at this time. And so maybe that's something you can get, or, maybe you can go to the store and get a new stuffy with them. You know, Maybe they're used to like a light in the room. And so um, having like a night light, having the child draw pictures of their favorite places, asking the child where he or she would like to live someday, um, asking the child where they would like to travel or visit, and, having them describe where they wouldn't like to live or visit. Maybe they have places in mind already that they wouldn't want to visit there. And so, having those conversations of, of both, like, I mean, I feel like with this question, it's like of both, definitely like the positive, and also looking at things that, could be hard to say, and hard to look at, but, having that conversation and, safe and calm and relaxed manner that allows for them to be able to like speak openly about the things they like and don't like. You may remember when doing CCT or KCT, if you took that class, that there is a fair amount of time that was spent on the topic of culture. Culture is the fundamental building block of identity. When young children are cared for by their parents and other family members, the process of culture and learning occurs naturally. But, culture has so many different elements that some may be obvious for some people, while other experiences are from, culture norms that are hidden unless you are immersed in that culture. In CCT, they referenced culture in terms of an iceberg. The culture iceberg model. So as we can see on the surface, you see things that are easily visible, such as food, holidays that are celebrated, language, music, dreads, hairstyles that we may see. But then we also have the items that are less visible, such as rules in one's home, values, manners that may have been learned, authority and leadership, eye contact, body language, roles based on gender and age, hygiene, displays of emotion, personal space, religion, and beliefs. Like when we are first getting to know a child whose culture is different from that of our own, we're usually only interacting with the tip of the iceberg in terms of our understanding of that culture often. And we may focus on the foods that they eat, clothes that are worn, picking up on that, religion, if they're into sports or other recreational activities, the language they speak, music, and other celebrations. But what we might be missing, are those things that are not always just readily accessible. Um, you know, when a child is placed in our home, potentially like eye contact is not, super common or something that they were used to. Um, and also because of their cultural upbringing, it's for us, we may or no, I shouldn't say for us, for some, they may look at it as like a sign of disrespect when there's not eye contact. But, in different cultures, it is different. Um, and so, and also potentially like, unpacking and handling emotions, and some homes, it's big emotions are not encouraged. And in other homes, it's like, express yourself, feel that, this is okay and this space is fine. And so, also noting like attitudes towards our elders or many others, and that there are many unspoken rules of cultures. And it's important for us to find out, what is culturally important to a child, and we can do this, like by like what we had said earlier on the other sides, is with asking questions. We can ask about holidays or, traditions that they celebrate and what those celebrations look like. And then we can see about trying to incorporate some of those into your house. You can ask the social worker, you can ask family members about, a child's culture to help gain a better understanding. Preparing a child's favorite foods that they've mentioned, asking the child to describe their favorite holidays and how they were celebrated. Um, incorporating those foods into your family meals, honoring the child's sense of style and the way that they like to dress, making community and cultural connections, maintaining a child's hair and skincare, you know, looking into, different hair products that are helpful, looking into different items around skincare, um, learning about, like, sometimes, when you go to a doctor, some of the things that are touched on is talking about like keloid scarring, um, because that is something that can happen. And so, knowing ways to help if that does happen, like knowing creams, eczema can be common for children. And so, knowing different ways to meet those skincare needs, and meeting the hair care needs. Being cautious about making any dramatic changes to a child's appearance, such as cutting a child's hair, and definitely making sure that you're checking in with the social worker or extended family about that or parents about that. Um, Engaging the child in community activities related to their cultural background that are of interest to them and that they want to do.
Deshanna, I learned a few things in my fostering career. Like there are a whole lot of ways to make macaroni and cheese. When you're talking about prepare the child's favorite food, I was doing that one night. I make macaroni and cheese from scratch, and the child like choked on it and spit it back out and was like, "This isn't my mama's macaroni and cheese." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what does your mama's macaroni and cheese look like?" And they said it's orange. And I'm like, "Okay." I thought mine was too, but evidently it wasn't. Um, so lots of different ways. So just because it may be their favorite food, you may not cook it the way that their mama did. And so asking, for a recipe from a mom or an extended family member would also be a good way to maintain that culture.
Yes.
And one of the other things I learned too is in my white world, if I go to a baby shower, it's often, baby blue, pastel pink colors. And when I got my first child of color and pulled out my box of clothes, I noticed that they were all pretty white in colors as far as pastels, which this
Mhm.
baby happened to be Hispanic. And putting a pastel on a darker skin tone just did nothing for them. So learning how to shop outside of my norm and bringing in pinks and greens and bolder colors and knowing that that's okay to put hot pink on a baby. It doesn't have to be pastel, so things like that I think we learn along the way as well.
Yes. Yeah. No, and just, and being curious, asking those questions, going into the hair salons, sometimes you might get those looks, but still, like, going to the hair salon to be showing and taking that initiative of, at the end of the day, you are caring for your child's hair. You are doing, what they need for their hair. Potentially going in and getting those tips on like how to do protective hairstyles, um because for a black child, like, hair means a lot. There's a lot that goes, with that, and and one's like identity and self-esteem and how they feel about that, and so making sure that it's taken care of well is very important, because also, as mentioned in the earlier conversation this evening, it's like potentially if like the hair is not taken care of, then it can, get tangled up and then potentially it has to be cut some. And like no one wants to have to do that, but if you're not taking care of a child's hair and putting it into styles that will protect it, then that can happen. Um, and same with skin. Making sure using lotions. Maybe previously you haven't been used to doing a daily lotion routine, but for, a child with darker toned skin, they got to use the lotion daily. You don't want to be sending your child out of the home with like ashy skin, because someone's going to potentially notice it and someone's going to potentially comment on it. And so, that's also, what you're thinking about. And having those conversations with your kids and kind of, uplifting them to look at that and think of that. And looking at the connection of history. The last one on this list this evening, but it's certainly not the least, connection. We're going to look at a little bit of history tonight. And looking at history, we want to look at and ask the question of, how does your child know about their past? We want children to be proud of who they are. And we also want them to know where they came from. If not in their immediate situation, then in the historic situation. We don't want our children to feel that they have to change their ethnic identity by being in foster care. There are many customs, languages, legends, and stories that are passed down from generation to generation, and that our children can be proud of. And it's up to us as adults in their lives to find out about a child's history and embrace that with them and for them. What is it to have to offer these celebrations and nuances of every culture? And how can we embrace those? How can we learn about a child's history and incorporate some of that into the child's present? Allow the child to talk about their history, both the pleasant and unpleasant experiences. Ask the child how he or she prefers to celebrate birthdays. Have the child tell you about favorite memories that they have. Have them maybe also talk about difficult memories that they have. Ask them about what they would like to forget about the past. Show a child photos of your family and friends and encourage them to tell you about their family and friends. And if you're able to get photos, then if they're already in a book, then that's wonderful. If you're able to get photos and then put them into a photo album for the child or with the child, that can be a great connection experience. Have them draw pictures of his or her former home, the school that they previously went to. Talk with the social worker about the child's past. Construct a child's life book or memory box. And I know we touched on that earlier. But yeah, putting those things together, or doing those things on your own and offering it as like a gift. Sometimes potentially, in going through this process, like we're, providing, maybe we're doing like a short-term placement and we know that. And so then, making a book of the time that you spent together that the child can take on with them when they go to their next placement, or a memory box that you put together that they can take on with them, to their next placement. When children reunify, or when they return home to their parents, or potentially like extended family members and to their culture as well. Even for children who will potentially never end up reunifying, their well-being will be improved if they have a healthy understanding of um, their cultural connections and a positive self that includes their full cultural identity and the history that comes with that and learning that identity. Oh, sorry, I'm too soon. So as we are stepping in, to the ending of this evening and looking at those different connections that we went through, I wanted to open up this time to kind of ask and see if there's any additional questions